You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Another day, another Outsiders spoiler preview card. Brendan, have you seen the latest preview card for Outsiders?
Yeah, I think it's the best one.
It's the best one?
I think it's the most exciting, right? You're talking about Dishonor?
I'm talking about Dishonor.
It's the most exciting.
It's most exciting?
Yeah,
maybe.
Definitely. Rest of the game, we've never seen anything like that before. And I don't know. I guess I just have a bit of a proclivity towards Ninja Control. And this is like, gets me excited.
Well, we'll talk about that. There's a couple other cards that have been previewed this week as well. Outsiders preview cards starting to really trickle through now as we head towards the preview season, which actually starts in like a week and a half, right? So not far off. We've got our preview card, Brendan. We do have a preview card for Outsiders. We have now seen it. Yes, we've seen it. We've just seen it. So we revealed that in, I think it's the second day of previews. So make sure to look out for that.
Yeah, I mean, that card is technically broken, I guess. I mean, it's not even a matter of opinion. It's technically broken. But yeah, definitely breaks the core tenets of the game.
Yep. Well, I don't know what else. Maybe we'll drop some hints as we get closer to the time. But Brendan's already given you something there. Anyway, episode 98 of Arsenal Pass. Welcome. This is calling preparations. We're talking about, I guess we're in the midst of a calling season that's about to wrap up as we head towards, we hurdle towards Outsiders releasing. I'm playing a calling this weekend in Auckland, New Zealand. We have, of course, had Indianapolis a couple of weeks ago. Plus, we've had a swath of battle-hardened events. And, through this sort of time period post-Dynasty, I myself have been preparing for events, and, Brendan's been doing it a lot in the past. So we are going to talk about preparation for events like callings, pro tours, things like that. And through the specific lens of this particular calling and a lot of learnings that have happened through this season in particular when it comes to preparing for Flesh and Blood events. So before that though, Brendan, you haven't been playing Flesh and Blood this week, but you did have the marathon in Austin. How did you get on?
Yeah, so you might hear my voice, but I actually got like a sinus infection, chest infection pretty bad the week before. My girlfriend got really, really sick. So I ended up doing the half marathon, and we have a marathon. I'm doing a marathon now with my brother in May in California, which I'm actually really excited for because it's a freaking beautiful one. Basically, you start out in the middle of the mountains and you run to the beach. It's called Mountains to Beach, and a very
imaginative name there. Yeah.
Very imaginative name. Yeah. So, I was pretty freaking beat down going into that race, but just did the half, and it was tougher than I expected. Which I think was mostly because I was sick, but also Austin is just kind of a bitch, to be honest. Like it's like all uphill for 3 miles, which is no big deal because that's when you're starting. Then you level out, and then the last 3 miles, like these rolling hills that were taking freaking souls. People were fading out right at the end. But yeah, it was great. It was fun, and I learned a lot. We shot for sub 2 hours and 30 minutes, which is it's pretty slow. It's pretty slow pace. It's around 11 minutes, but if you're doing it your first time, it's reasonable. And I finished at 2:29:59, literally 1 second to go. Yeah, I had a great time. I am excited for the California one, but not excited to be in training for another 2 months now. But it's all the better.
Yeah, I mean, best of luck to you.
Yeah,
I can't see myself running a half marathon. A half marathon, maybe I could stretch to that, but definitely not a marathon. That's a big undertaking. So, 2 more months of training, and you'll be heading into the summer months. So I guess a bit nicer, especially although that may be the opposite, too hot in California.
much worse. I mean, I sweat a lot, dude. It's crazy. Like I'm indistinguishable from jumping in a pool. So I went through like 5 full head sweatbands on this race. But California should be reasonable, but yeah, you really want to be, for me, ideally 40 degrees Fahrenheit. They're like maybe 30s, which is like pretty cold because once you creep up, dude, you just start sweating and it sucks.
I'm also a sweaty guy.
Yeah.
Well, myself, I mean, no half marathons for me, although I did do a 20 kilometer like erg bike challenge, trying to sprint that out. That destroyed my soul earlier this week, but otherwise just flesh and blood testing. Calling, of course, this weekend. Going to go through my whole preparations, the kind of journey that has been, talk about the decks that I'm looking to play and what I'm going to play this weekend in Auckland. And that's kind of been it, just trying to get ahead of things. I was on holiday for a couple of weeks, so work's been busy, but I get to play some Flesh and Blood this week. I'm super excited. Like I love the prospect of playing big Flesh and Blood events, and I think there's a lot of people in this boat. If you went to Indianapolis, or maybe you've played one of these battle hardens in Europe recently, or even in the US, playing these events, I think you come out of these events and you have this like vigor for playing Flesh and Blood. I know after events, we talk about it at Worlds, right, Brendan? You were like, on the Sunday, you're like, man, I just want to play some Flesh and Blood, to the point that on Sunday evening at the players' party post World Championships, Brendan just played Flesh and Blood half cut all night. So
yeah,
he knows what it's like. Well,
speaking of big events, the Magic the Gathering Pro Tour happened last weekend. And I just want to bring it up because it was freaking amazing. They came back from not doing paper events, not doing coverage, and they really hit it out of the park in terms of production value. It was ridiculous.
It was really good.
It was really, really good. I think that, Flesh and Blood, just being on the coverage side of that a bit now, we could definitely pick up some from that, especially the lack of downtime. Like, it was just straight freaking content the whole time. But it's just awesome to see other, even though I know some people look at Flesh and Blood, look at Magic as like competitors, but we're all kind of in the same game, to be honest. And I think that they really set the bar. And I think that Flesh and Blood will actually level up as a result of what happened last week with the coverage from Magic. So I watched it. I thought it was great. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend you check it out.
Yeah, I really hope that LSS and coverage partners can take some beats from that, because I only saw a little bit so far the first few rounds, but And this is just from a coverage perspective. I think what the things I love to see and I'd love to see in Flesh and Blood, you sit down, you're at home, you watch this event, and it feels like you're there as a spectator. Not quite there, but there's a whole thing happening, unfolding in front of you, and you've got all these people who, there's pundits, there's commentary for the matches, obviously. Then you go back to the news desk and they're talking about the event and how it's unfolding. There's updates on, key players, your favorite players, things like this. They flow to an interview, talk about how a team prepared for the event. Then they flow to this draft year, or this deck tech, whatever it might be. And it's so like you say, no downtime, but also you get to feel like you're actually watching a big event and you're involved with something.
It's like this one. It felt like real TV. It was crazy. So there was. I mean, I'll mention a few specifics that are a bit more niche that I think were huge level up. So they did cards in hand, and they had two people working on it. One of them being Anurag Das and I think Will Hall, which are some big kind of content creators there. But anyway, they were doing cards in hand, and like it was freaking solid. Like it was spot on. We knew every single card. Like when it was a main feature match, we knew every single card in the player's hand. It added tons of context. It was great. They upgraded the freaking camera or whatever was looking at it was ridiculous. Like it was the best resolution I've ever seen. They went through a north-south play state, which is usually people don't like that, but because the camera was so high quality, like they were able to expand the play area so much, it actually looked crazy good on the TV. And on top of that, of course, like the commentators were great, but then they had the analyst desk and just all those other different sort of avenues that constantly talked about, like constantly going to deck text, constantly going to talking about the teams, et cetera, et cetera. But the maximum break was 2 minutes. Like it was freaking straight content. You were watching it for 8 to 10 hours a day for the 3 hours that it went. So yeah, kudos to them.
Breaks are great, right? Like if you're someone who wants to tune into the full thing, you want to take comfort breaks, food breaks, whatever it might be. And of course, Twitch you can rewatch stuff, right? So maybe you missed the end of the day, you can go back and watch it. But yeah, I am excited to actually go. I've only seen a bit of it. As I said, I'm excited to go back and watch the whole thing because it did really feel like a spectacle and an event. Anyway, Brendan, let's get into some Flesh and Blood news. Let's start with these preview cards because there has been more preview cards trickling through. As we said, we got Dishonored literally just before the podcast dropped, a couple of hours before. I mean, I just woke up, so to me, it's just happened. We've also seen Collapsing Trap, which is the Majestic Ranger Defense Trap, and we had this Peace of Mind, which is the Team Covenant preview card with their alt art promo card. Why don't we start with Dishonored? It's the latest to come out. Brendan, why don't you tell us what Dishonored does and then tell us your thoughts on Dishonored? Yeah,
so Dishonored's a ninja action attack Majestic. It's a blue strip, 0 cost, and 2 attack, 3 defense. But it says combo. If Bonds of Ancestry was the last attack on this combat chain, this has +2, so getting up to 4. And then it says when this hits a hero, if you control Surging Strike, Descendant Gust Wave, and Bonds of Ancestry, that hero loses all abilities for the rest of the game. Like my first takeaway is like, yeah, the second piece of text here is probably a bit challenging to get. Definitely does favor Katsu, by the way, because we've been talking a lot about the dichotomy between Katsu and Fi, and how Fi just sort of outvalues Katsu in the sense because you just get that sort of +1 per turn. But this is leaning more into what Katsu's good at, and is like the card selection, tutoring up cards, and completing these combo lines. So that makes it more exciting. And yeah, while this secondary text might be hard to hit, it is cool for the sort of ninja control archetype, and to add just more relevant on-hit triggers to Katsu. I'm not sure how hard it will be to hit. I'm just assuming. But yeah, the hero losing all abilities for the rest of the game. That's a pretty atypical line of text there. A on-hit trigger that lasts farther than a turn cycle. I don't think we've seen anything like that before.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw Bonds of Ancestry, I was super interested, right? You know, we have Surging Strike, Whelming Gust Wave, and traditionally this McGinty Lord of Wind line, right? And that was the line. And then we saw Bonds of Ancestry, and it's like, okay, cool. Any card with Gust Wave in the name, well, does that mean we're going to get a new Gust Wave, but also we've got a new Chain Ender for Surging Strike? And all of a sudden, yeah, we do, but it's actually not Bonds of Ancestry. It's, you know, it's now this card. It's Dishonor. So what I really like about this card, and someone asked me, I think it was a question in maybe the mailbag, or someone had asked it separately, was like, how can Katsu be good? Like, what will it take for Katsu to be good? And the answer is for the hero ability to be super, super relevant.
Yeah.
And I think when you've got these different ways to produce combo lines, different ways to put cards together, and even branch off cards so that your hand, you want that Katsu ability to be able to go and find, you know, the best card it can, but you want to have the density of other combo threats in the deck so that when you draw up a hand, you have multiple of these options. You know, so traditionally, if it's like, okay, Surging Strike, Gust Wave, McGinty, you know, the opponent plays a Surging Strike. It's like, okay, well, what's the worst that can happen here? Either they have Gust Wave or McGinty, and I'm going to commit to blocking the McGinty, and they have to go and get that. But if all of a sudden they've got these other options to go and get, you don't know what the breakpoint's going to be on something, you know, maybe there's 2 different Gust Waves, it can start to be a little bit different. So I really like this coming after Bonds of Ancestry. I already thought that card was quite cool, you know, a way to get a free 0/4 attack that has a relevant ability, and now Dishonor. So you can just, and blue, right? A combo card in blue Majestics, I think, that have relevant abilities. You know, you can pitch this early, you can then go and get it off your card. So I think this card is really, really cool. At worst, a 0/4, right? And at best, you know, something that's super relevant if heroes aren't prepared for it to, you know, turn the hero ability off for the rest of the game. Like that is really relevant, you know. I mean, I know the first joke someone posted in chat Iman is like, oh, Livia.
Well, yeah, unfortunately for Kano, this would be pretty freaking bad. But yeah, I mean, it's a blue block. It's a blue block 3. It's a great resource card at the very least. I think it's just tough when we discuss like Ninja and Katsu being relevant. It's like, what do you have to do to make Katsu actually good? What kind of cards do you have to print? And I think I'm not sure if it's exactly this, but it's cards like this, like the on-hit abilities of the cards have to be really, really relevant. Because I think that Katsu's ability effectively has to convert to more than one point of quantitative value per turn, or it's just like you should be playing 5.
It's really hard to put a quantitative value on that because of what it is, right? It's a tutor effect. You know, some other tutor effects. So basically, I guess the best way is like, okay, the worst card in your hand turns into, so say it's a blue Whelming Gust Wave that you're not going to use. So if you can turn that into a 0/4, you know, you're up +3 on that card's value, but really you're not, because that card is probably average value is 3 on defense, right? So if you go get a 0/4, you're up 1, or you have a spare resource and you can get a card that costs 1 and it comes in for 5, you know, like Pounding Gale, for instance, then, you know, you're going to be up +2. So those are the kind of things I think you have to look at, as you say, and that's harder to do. But with more and more combo cards and more ways to make your hands more relevant, because there's just more combo enders, or there's more combo middle cards to go and find to make your hands as good as possible and get the most damage out of as possible, the most on-hit effects as possible, that's going to make Katsu better and better. So yeah. I'm excited. I'd love to play Katsu in Outsiders. I think, you know, I got my eye on Riptide right now, but if Katsu has a lot of these different ways to build it, and it's not, you know, maybe you know, you can build it aggro, you can build it mid-range, you build with these different combos, that makes me super excited. Maybe even transformational like that. I'm in there for that.
Yeah, I to be honest, I think that Flick Flack is broken. Like I think it's a legitimately like super overpowered card, especially at red and blue. And it's like if we can just get enough supporting cards to play those cards, I think that Katsu is a great deck. I mean that you could argue that Drone of Brutality is what pushed Katsu into success initially. Back in like Welcome to Wraith, but it was really Flick Flack. That's why Katsu won out above the other heroes in terms of like the premier fatigue deck.
Yeah, it was so above rate in Welcome to Wraith, and it is above rate, like 0 for 6, and at blue 0 for 4. Like that is good. Obviously, there's prerequisites and there's some restrictions, but you know the more and more combo cards you can get into your deck that are just naturally really really good, that makes Flick Flack even better naturally, like you say, and great sideboard options, or potentially you play in this kind of mid range or control way.
All right.
I want to talk about Collapsing Trap, because another interesting card we saw, another Majestic. This is a range defense reaction trap, cost 0, defends for 3, and it's a legendary Riptide specialization. And it says when this defends an attack with Go Again, the defending hero discards their hand, then draws that many cards, -1. And we did also get a rules clarification with this. So anything with the type line, so the previous traps had the type line can only be played from Arsenal. The new traps do not have that. So the new traps in this set will be able to be played from hand. That does not change the Crucible of War traps that we'd already seen that do have that type line. Can only be played from Arsenal, so those won't change. But you know, these new traps we're going to see in this set can be played from hand, which I think is a very interesting change and potentially a very cool one.
I mean, it's the only thing that was going to save the game design that went around traps, because they were sort of hyped up initially, and they were the meta that they were exposed to when they first came out was just not the right meta. It was dominated by dash and stuff, but. Like, I think the traps just kind of failed a bit, and this is the best chance we have. And I think that they're cool from, like, ideologically, but they just weren't quite there. This card is very, very good and excites me. But the biggest question I have is whether they're going to keep printing 0 for 4 red traps, because then traps are just strictly better than, like, the defense reactions. And, you know, a 0 for 4 defense reaction that adds a negative on hit or trigger to your opponent, that's ridiculous. That's so much better than Sink Below, I think. So Collapsing Trap itself, though, there's a reason why this is legendary. This card is very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, you got to take it the fact that those are tied to specific heroes or specific classes, right? So an above rate card on a generic, like versus a generic in a class is not uncommon. Like that is, you know, you can have above rate cards in classes. Like that's not out of the question. But how many of them and to what effect? Like a 0 for 4 that has the ability to say like deal 2 damage, and now it's a 0 for 6. You know, Flick Flack-esque.
Yeah. That's the parallel, right? It's like you just look at Flick Flack, and like Flick Flack is freaking busted, and it's like anything that gets close to being Flick Flack-esque, right? Which is 0 for 4 with like legitimate upside past like hand filtering or like a scry or something. Like those cards are really, really powerful, and if they errata traps and they change the rule around and they print like a few of them, we could see a totally different type of ranger come onto the scene. Also just mid-range rangers and Azalea and things like that.
I don't think you would see, for instance, Tripwire Trap necessarily printed without that text line. Like I think it would have to look a bit different. And I think that's clearly why these are not getting errated. Part of it, obviously, there's the printing issue. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. As we get into Outsiders more, we'll see what these traps look like. But this is a very cool one. And like you say, yeah, very powerful. Makes sense. It's legendary. Let's talk about this last card quickly. I don't think we need to dwell on it too much, but Peace of Mind. It's a generic instant and common. Cost 2 at the red line that we're seeing. It does have a full cycle. And it says the next time you would be dealt attack damage this turn, prevent 4 of that damage, create a ponder token. The yellow prevents 3, the blue prevents 2. I don't know. I don't really have many thoughts about this card. It's cool to see more ways to create ponder tokens. So like if you evaluate this card right at red, costs you 2 plus the card itself to prevent 4 damage, and then you have a ponder token that's going to draw your card into game. So end of turn, sorry. So you could look at this as, I guess, as 2 cards for potentially 7. You know, 4 damage prevented plus a card drawn. Doesn't seem too bad, but my sort of thought with this is, where is this going to be used? You know, where is this going to be more relevant than, say, a 0 for 4 defense reaction? Is it against Dominate, for instance? Like, where is this going to be relevant?
So, yeah, I don't think I think this card will slot into decks that are already utilizing this archetype. I don't think it's just going to slot in as a generically good card like something like Sync Blow that would, but it could. I mean, the 2 and being able to utilize that extra resource to block like a piece of Arcane or filter via Crown of Seeds, like that's very good. Like the sort of runoff if you pitch a blue for this. But outside of that, I don't really see this card being utilized, like just being that like generic good card that everybody starts playing in their deck, which I think it was kind of hyped up. Like it was going to be that. I think it's more of like, if you're trying to prevent more damage, you're maybe a bit more controlling. This is potentially a good option. I'm also very happy that it said physical damage. I was like, if I saw it, I was like, God damn it. I was like, not again.
Classic Brendan immediately came. Yeah, I mean, the classic Wolfpack shenanigans hyping this card up, I think, but I think, you look at, let's take an example, right? This with Crown of Seeds. I mean, Crown of Seeds is a very strong card, obviously, in itself, but pitch your blue, you activate Crown of Seeds, and then you turn the floating 2 resources into prevent 4, draw a card, which then replaces your arsenal next turn if you're in a full defensive mode. That's a really good trade, right? Like it's it's not a bad trade whatsoever. So, but like you say, I think it's very specific. It's going to be in archetypes that can utilize the 2 resources to best effect with the other resource pitching a blue, and it's going to be where that ponder token is really relevant. So, replacing an arsenal for Crown of Seeds, so it doesn't matter what the card is, that's really relevant. Decks that potentially have just like the same kind of effect over and over again, maybe decks that play a lot of traps, for instance, relevant. But yeah, we'll see. Let's move on in the news. Trapperata we already talked about. There has been an organized play announcement that has come for, I guess it's a premier play announcement, which is just putting a bit of a roadmap for the rest of the year. Not too many events fully confirmed, but we have had 2 callings in Europe confirmed. So Antwerp and Birmingham have been confirmed to be going ahead, plus some more Battle Hardens. You can go and check out where all these Battle Hardens are over on Flesh and Blood on the fabtcg.com website. There's one in Richmond, Pittsburgh, Salt Lake City in the US, and there's also been one confirmed for Germany. So that's super exciting for German fans of the game. And then I think this is written by James White, and I think he gives a bit of an outline of some of the events to expect for the rest of the year. So for my brethren in Asia Pacific, not too much news. In fact, in the article it says, noticeably absent from today's article is news surrounding Asia Pacific. But apparently by March 31st, we will have a lot of these events in the books in terms of scheduled. So it looks like, if just extrapolating from this article, we will probably get a calling in Australia to go along with this calling in New Zealand, plus a calling in Asia. Or 2 callings in Asia, in Southeast Asia, which is super exciting. I'd love to see a calling in Japan. I would imagine Singapore would be a huge candidate for another calling just based on how that event went. And James' words, I was at the calling Singapore, James White said at the calling Singapore, expect big things here in Singapore for Flesh and Blood in the very near future.
Wonder if that's a pro tour or Worlds.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. I think that, so one thing to note here is that we were probably some of the biggest critics over the past year for Flesh and Blood's sort of announcement schedule and how close it was to events. So a little golf clap here for them, starting to turn that around, give us a bit more notice. I think we should just recognize that, because we've definitely been digging them for a while because they were announcing pretty late. I think that the only critique around this news that I've seen is that, it does seem clear that OP has taken a step back in terms of number of events, and not everybody thinks that's a bonus. That's the one critique, is just the lack of events. I know it's weird coming off of last year, because LSS they sort of toned down the number of events by saying that there was too many last year, and I think that some of us actually kind of agreed with that back then. We're like, damn, we just came out of a tournament, we're back into PT2, right? And then we're doing this.
Exactly.
And then now that it's slowed down, it's like, damn, there's like no tournament. So it's a weird balance. I think that I would like to see more. I think that the calling circuit, and I know that the US was spoiled for callings, and Germany, Europe and Asia really got screwed, but the calling circuit that we had back in Tales of Aria Limited for the United States and back around that Vegas time, that was awesome. That felt like peak Flesh and Blood to me. I would love to be able to recapture that experience sometime. Yeah,
it's worth noting that there's not less callings. They're just not all in North America. And the critics I've seen of this mostly are people in North America.
Yeah. Everybody else is like, right? Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah, we get some events. Yeah, which I understand, right? Like you went from that season that year where you had 4 callings. Was it 5 even, because it was Vegas, then Vegas 2 limited, and then the Orlando. So 4 callings and the back half of the year. Super exciting, right? And this year there's going to be 1 more calling in North America. Is it 1 or maybe 2, I guess, with nationals? But it's like, that's obviously a step down. But, for the rest of the world, it's like, okay, Europe, not 1, not 2, but 3 callings. That's the tagline for Europe this year. And also the World Championships happening in Europe. That is the next big piece of news, although we don't know where and when yet, but that will be announced at PT Baltimore. Asia Pacific getting callings, Europe, like we just talked about, Brazil's getting some like a battle hardened. I think like there are events happening that just the spread because of the player base now it's starting to spread out. And I do agree, I think we've definitely taken a bit of a step back in terms of maybe these competitive regions, basically just North America and the events they get. And I think there's an opportunity to rectify that next year. But also at the same time, I think, as a player who wants to also do other things, I kind of really like the fact that we're, I agree. I thought last year I felt like I was just, my whole year was flesh and blood. And I feel like this year I have some downtime, and that is keeping me, I guess, the vigor for the game alive. But I do admit, when it comes to like, I'm thinking about the calling this weekend, I just know on Monday when I'm on my flight back home, I'm gonna be like, man, when's the next big event? Like it is, you do get that bug. And I think obviously players posted in Indianapolis have that, this announcement coming off the back of that. Players in Europe rejoice because you're going to have a really good year of flesh and blood.
I think that they could upgrade some of the battle hardens in the US to callings because the turnouts are so high, and the battle harden is in this weird middle ground where it's like it's hard to justify traveling for it. Yeah, it's hard to justify traveling for it despite so many people showing up and despite them being so popular. So I think that you can see the proof of concept that the competitive drive is there for the player base, and we could potentially upgrade these from battle hardens. In other news, by the way, the grassroots tournaments of Flesh and Blood are doing really well. Realm Games just announced a 2024 Flesh and Blood cruise tournament. I don't know if you saw that.
Reminds me of like old Magic, yeah, right? Like the Magic cruises.
Oh, we're definitely going on that, by the way. That's hilarious.
I mean, twist my arm.
Definitely. Yeah, twist my arm.
I do like that North America is being supplemented by these awesome events. Obviously, that that doesn't provide some of the prestige of like ELO and things like that callings do. But I do agree, like if you change just 2 battle hardens to callings from North America, I think everyone would be super thrilled with the year. As it is, I think people are still pretty happy, and we have a roadmap. We talked about being critics of the tight turnaround on event scheduling. That has continued to happen this year so far, and to be honest, there is some pretty short notice events on here as well. With Antwerp, I think that's March 19th to 21st. Like that was announced a week ago, and that's less than a month away. We're still seeing short turnaround times, and yes, Worlds is announced in Europe, but we don't know where and we don't know when, so people still can't plan for that. So I will say, I'm super happy with this announcement. I think it's great, but I'm still going to say we need more time, need more lead time in these events.
I'm not going to lie, I thought it was only me, but I thought that was funny because the article came out, it was like, we heard you, we're announcing things early, and it was like a month away. I was like, what?
Yeah, Antwerp, March.
All right.
I think there's another one in April as well, right? I think Belgium is,
yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, you know what? It's May. You know what? I take that back. It's May. So they've given 3 months. I read March and was like, oh my goodness, can't believe it's in March. I take it back. Sorry. Analysis.
Well, let's throw it on the Barbie and make it better. What do we have for the Command and Cookout here?
Well, just before we get there, just quickly, the one thing I did want to talk about, because I think it's very, very cool, is it hasn't been talked about that much, I think, or at least I haven't been seeing as much, as Outsiders local language release is happening. As soon as Outsiders releases, it is releasing in native languages for parts of Europe, which is super cool and really exciting to see. So I think this is going to be, we've got a massive OP announcement for Europe, and we've got native language coming for a lot of Europe this year. That is really exciting for the growth of the game in Europe.
I'm pretty concerned about my ability to get whiteboarder cards for future sets if they're printing in native immediately.
Oh, cool. History Pack's still around, and they're out now. Anyway, as you say, let's head over to the Barbie, Brendan. The Command and Cookout. We've got a question from Loganinity7, came from the community Discord, and this question I think comes up from some other questions we've answered previously. But Command and Cookout, what is the list of cards that Hayden sees as fundamentally broken cards, and why does he think so? Brendan, we've talked about this before, some of the lists of cards that we think are on the chopping block in the future for being banned. Some of those have already been well and truly hit. Plunder Run, for instance. Winter's Whale now as well. What are your thoughts before I get on to my list? Do you have a criteria yourself? I mean, I have a bit of a criteria for this, which I can explain, but I'd love to throw it over to you first, because we haven't talked about this a lot ourselves, but it's something that we do reference sometimes.
Yeah, I think Crown of Seas is a little crazy. At least for a permanent that exists on the battlefield, it's just like it's a lot. But honestly, I'll throw myself under the bus and say that Aether Wildfire is probably a little busted. I guess. I mean, if we're talking about math and like quantitative values of cards and things being overrated, it's like, yeah, obviously Aether Wildfire is contextual, but it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So this question comes about because I have mentioned this a couple of times on pods about lists of cards. I've had since the game started, since Welcome to Wraith, I've had this kind of list of cards that I thought were really powerful and were cards that often I will go back to try and be like, okay, how do you build around? How do you like take advantage of these cards? How can I play as many of these cards as possible in a deck, for instance? And then the other piece of it is like, what's going to happen to these cards in the future? So there's been some cards like Plundor, we talked about Wind as well, which have been on there previously, Drone of Brutality, which slipped onto there after Auckland, definitely. But basically my criteria for this list is repetitive effects is one criteria. So repetitive effects that you can abuse to either change a game state or accelerate a game state or net gain resources. That's one particular criteria. The other is pieces that can easily in terms of it's easy to use and it can fit into potential shells of future design space that can abuse drawing cards, gaining resources, being able to set up combos basically to win the game. Those are the cards. That's kind of my criteria. And super above rate cards. That's kind of what it looks like for me, especially if those super above rate cards are really flexible. So, Flick Flack isn't on the list for me because it's not as flexible, right, Bruno? Although I do agree, 0 for 6 on face value is really, really powerful, but that card is not that flexible, for instance. So I thought I'd just give this list because I know the question that Commander Cookout was asking for these questions. So I'll just kind of run through them and I might maybe Brendan, you can just ask me for justification on a couple of them rather than us diving into all of them. But Tom of Fiendel is definitely on that list. Spark of Genius is on that list. 3 of a Kind. Energy Potion is very near the top of that list. Storm Striders, Great Library of Solana, Crown of Seeds, Channel Heroic, Aether Wildfire definitely, and Brainstorm is my current list of cards that I think have the potential to be broken or abused or end up on the ban list in the very near future of Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, if it's not equipment, I wonder if a decent, like if you were gonna if you wanted to put out like a pre-screening like criteria, it's like cards that people play 9 of, especially like generic cards. Like if you can justify playing 9 of a card, it's like maybe that should be a red flag. What was the question? Yeah, it looks like Gustwave. Mostly generics, right? Generic is the one. Like if it's generic, that's the. But yeah, it does sound like you picked all the fun cards. I'm not gonna lie. I hope the energy potion doesn't get banned. I understand how powerful it is, but I do think that in Flesh and Blood there should be strategies that reward players for setting up rather than just kind of playing their hand every turn. And I think the energy potion is like the perfect example of that, at least in the game right now.
Yeah, so it fits into my criteria of a card that allows you to do something outside of a normal turn structure to potentially present a game-ending combo and to present damage massively over and above rate, but it's also super flexible, being a blue, and the fact that you can just also use it anytime you want. There's no restriction around when you can activate it once it's on the field. So Energy Potion it's a card that I think is just going to continue to be in this game and continue to get better and better. I really hope we see a card like Potion of Strength become more relevant as well. The thing about the OG Welcome to Wraith potions, Timestamp being the other, of course, which we have seen have some play in, but obviously I think that delaying one action point as opposed to two resources is a little bit different. I think action points are a little bit easier to come by in the game these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this timestamp. I mean, a lot of these potions are just you're kind of investing the equity of a past turn into the future, which I think is cool. Like I think that you should be able to do that in Fab. It's just like, how do we do that without it breaking? Energy Potion isn't broken yet, unless you're playing Gato.
True. This is my watch list, as I say. Like, I don't think 3 of a Kind is broken yet, but it has the potential to be broken. It has the potential for abusability depending on, ways to, I guess, get around the effect or ways to have onboard sort of resources or assets that you can use once you can power your handful of cards. What's
that new Brute card, by the way? Sorry, that was a rogue thought that just creeped in for me. The one that lets you draw every time you discard.
Berserk?
Yeah. That's got to be on the list.
I think so. One of the pieces for me on my list is like it has to be white. I guess the design space has to look like it can be broken in the future. And I think with that one, I guess it's probably close to the list, to be honest. But I think my experience, like trying to look into that card, is that the random nature of the effect and the ability for the effect to just stop. So yes, if you could fill your entire deck with 6s, I guess, but then you need to also be able to fill your deck with ways to generate the draw. So there's always a natural kind of offset to that card in terms of you need the cards to be able to power the ability, but you also need the cards to fulfill the ability itself. So there's kind of a natural like tension there, which is a bit, I guess, a bit hard to maybe get around.
Same with Wildfire, though, right?
No. Wildfire's a lot more flexible, I would say.
Yeah, I think that card is wild, though. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Wildfire is wild.
I think it's like after this combo, I'm kind of confirmed that Hayden is protecting, sandbagging Brute, and then also just trying to get Wizard banned.
Yeah, that, or I think that Brute is pretty average and doesn't have these cards that are exploitable, and Wizard definitely does, because Brainstorm's also on this list. To be honest, there could be more. I mean, Storm Striders is definitely on this list. I think. I think that,
not that again. We've been there.
Anyway, if you want to know more about this, tweet at me or something, and I can give you specifics for each of the cards. If there's one of these cards that you disagree with or think is an interesting inclusion on this list, Great Library of Solana might be interesting to people. But if you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, you can do so at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Shoot us the question there. You can drop it in the comments below on YouTube. You can tweet at us, DM us on Twitter. I'll be at the Calling Auckland this weekend. You can slip me a little note, and please don't write a little note on a piece of paper and hand it to me, because it will end up back in your pocket. Anyway, Brendan, time for the main topic of the show. And we're going to dive into a little bit of preparation and through the lens specifically of the Calling Auckland. So, I think the way that we're going to kind of do this is I'm going to take you through what the specific journeys look like for testing for this event, preparing for the Calling Auckland. And Brendan, then I'm going to just open the floor to you to just kind of like pepper me with questions, to put in your kind of input of ways that you've maybe prepared differently, things that you like about the preparation we've done in the past, things you don't like, and we can just go from there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But first of all, I want to start with some high-level preparation considerations, and I want your input on these. Here's some questions for you. I'm going to fire them at you, and maybe I'll answer these, and maybe I'll just leave them to Brendan. What's the most important part of preparing for an event in your eyes? Preparing for any kind of event, whether it be a national championship, a pro tour, a calling, or even a pro quest if you're looking for that elusive PT invite.
Yeah, it's hard to say because, I think in the context of us and our past experience, I think the most important part of preparing for an event is getting reps on the deck. That's one of the things that we seem to struggle with. But I think for the normal person, right, approaching this from zero prior testing experience, I think the most important thing is discipline and actually getting those games in and having focused testing, not just jamming games with your friends and kind of, messing around. Not that you can't have fun, but I think a data-oriented approach and a disciplined approach where you set aside specific times and you sort of talk about goals for that time and zoom out after that, have meetings and sort of, monitor it like it was a professional endeavor. I think you're going to get a lot more out of it than you would if it was just sort of ad hoc or laissez-faire, just playing at a game store. And it's not necessarily less fun, but I just think it's much, much, much more effective. And I think it's really important to being successful with these events. Have a goal, I guess, is the most simple way of saying that.
Yeah, I would call it meaningful testing. I think that's what we've referred to it in the past as. I agree, and I definitely agree on getting reps of the deck. That's probably close for me. What about Brendan? What is the hardest part about tournament preparation?
Well, I think it's maintaining that level of that approach, right? Because I think that the testing process can quickly degenerate into just jamming games, or you lose sight, you lose that focus, right? It's really hard to actually maintain that focus over an extended period of time, especially when you're looking at a tournament like a Pro Tour or Worlds, because you can potentially be looking at months where you need to keep up team morale, keep everybody focused, keep data integrity intact, which degenerates quickly if you're with a bunch of card gamers. It's hard to get people to enter data, and actually just keep that goal in mind, while you're all there. That's honestly the hardest part for me, I think, is keeping everybody on board and everybody focused to try to achieve that original goal that you set out.
Yeah, I think for me, the hardest part about event preparation is staying committed and disciplined. I think, like you say, sometimes testing just isn't fun. It's okay, we need to test into this ultimate fatigue matchup to work out our plan and make sure it's viable. And you know what? For me, that's not very enjoyable, playing the ultimate side of the deck, but someone's got to do it, right? And so often I'll be like, okay, I'm going to do it. Let's just get it done. And I guess the reason for me to stay disciplined is the end goal is going to provide me with, a really good sort of resource that I can then take into the event. So yes, 1 or 2 days of testing might not be as enjoyable as the other 1 or 2 days, but sometimes it's just keep discipline and get it done and keep that focused testing like you talked about before.
Yeah, I think a lot of testing is not pure like hedonism. Like it's not enjoyable.
No.
But that's how the best things in life are. You kind of sometimes you have to work hard, but it's really not that. You just you got to keep the goal in mind, and if you do that, it's all worth it in the end, I think.
Yeah, I don't come out of like a ridiculous sweat session. I mean, I come out of it feeling great and feeling like I had a good time. I want to do it again. But at the time, halfway through, when I'm absolutely dying and my heart rate's like knocking on the door of 200 and I feel like I'm going to faint. No, I don't feel good about that. But,
Yeah.
That's how things are. What is something people don't often consider when it comes to event preparation? What is something that people just kind of pass by or just kind of, ignore?
Data, I think. Like, I think that people who don't utilize data in their testing process are just shortchanging themselves. Like, there's no reason not to, and it's pretty much universally unpleasant at every point of the experience.
Like metadata, you mean?
No, like entering your data from testing games. Metadata as well, I mean, but this is the part that sucks is like, I think if you're playing games in a testing group or even with two people, you should be entering the results of every match, tracking the decks, tracking the archetypes, tracking card changes, tracking just like general notes. Like we used to do like word queries over our notes for like punt and stuff like that to create like a punt percentage of like outlier games and things like that. I mean, there's just so much
you might have.
Yeah, there's just so much you can do with the data, and I think it's so easy to just not do that because it sucks. There's nothing fun about it, and sometimes it's freaking useless too in the end. But sometimes it's useful, and when it is useful, you have a massive edge over all the other people that are not keeping track of their data.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think obviously a lot of your answers here are data related. I think I'll take this back a step for me. I think something that people don't consider when it comes to event preparation is their sample size in testing. I think people often attribute things based on really small sample size as absolute. And I think that's why you get a lot of discourse in the community between, partly part of the discourse in the community between matchups and how people think, the 60 matchup, the classic, right? That we've talked about before, both players feeling like they're favored into a matchup. And it's like, I think small sample sizes can also lead to that. But I think sometimes small sample sizes also cause you to make decisions that, can affirm biases that you might have. Like, okay, I play some games with this deck into a matchup that is traditionally unfavored. The opponent doesn't really understand the matchup. We play 2 games, and that's my data set. Yeah, the matchup is like, I can flip this matchup. It's actually a great matchup. And then all of a sudden you go to the event, you play against players who have prepared a lot more games against that deck, and you don't run the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Or you attribute the 3 games you play into your like potentially you think is a good matchup, but actually might be a bad matchup. Is like, yeah, I just got really unlucky. My draws were terrible. Whatever. I'm going to write that off. It's like, should you be writing that data off? In other cases, like, should you be investigating that data more? I think is.
And like in modern day Flesh and Blood, you got Tommy Talishar that comes to the testing group is like 100 with this deck.
80% win rate.
80%. No, 1800% win rate. Never lose.
What is one thing that you personally, Brendan, think you do well when it comes to event preparation?
I don't know. I think I'm pretty good at keeping the goal in mind. I think that honestly, that's the role that I kind of get. I don't know if I get forced into it or I just end up falling into it, but I feel like the kind of the sort of trying to look at everything from the 10,000 foot view. Yeah, bingo card that, boys. And try to keep everybody sort of like grounded and the goal in mind to keep the testing focused tends to be just like one of the responsibilities that I end up picking up, whether we've designated it or not. I don't know if I'm necessarily good at it, but I find that I end up kind of sometimes supplementing that role. What about yourself?
I think it's asking questions. I think one of the things that my testing seems to go really well is that we get through sessions, we ask questions, we answer those questions, and we just stay really focused to try and find the solutions that we're looking for. And we get through them pretty quickly. Like, I'll go through some of the testing we did for Auckland, but we got through a lot of decks and a lot of matchups in a very short space of time, and I feel pretty confident in the kind of results that we came to because, we had these questions, we answered the questions with a very specific frame when we played these matchups, and I'll explain that a little bit later what that kind of means. But just as a small example, right, I used the Fatigue Ultimate matchup before. It's like, okay, we're going to play 10 games of these strategies into Fatigue Ultimate, and I think in a matchup like that where both players can understand both sides of the matchup, you can get by with a small sample size because you're trying to answer a question, look at repetitive play patterns, like where can I leak damage, how can I leak damage, is the strategy viable because of that? And I think it doesn't take many sets to answer that question, and then we can move on. So focus questions, answering those questions is something I think that we've kind of done well, and I think just makes your testing process just so much more efficient, and you can get through sort of questions a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty funny, actually. You talked about your old 10,000 foot view, just a small tangent aside, because I think people enjoy this. But if you know, I know Brendan, you know who Chris Bewley is. People might know Chris Bewley was the former, I don't even know what his role was, social media manager, maybe for Legend Story Studios. Now moved on to
Community
do other things,
maybe.
but yeah. But one time, me and friend of the show, Dan Mackay, testing partner, we made a poster for Chris Bewley, which was called Bewleyisms, which was literally just all the things that Chris Bewley said on repeat. And it was this big poster that had them all on there. And some of them, you know, I won't go into. But I feel like maybe Brendan, people might make the same thing for you. You know, Brendanisms with 10,000 foot view, heuristics. You know, all these things on them.
Heuristics is a great word, and it's a great.
Your birthday's
tool.
coming up.
Yeah.
So
great word, great tool.
What's one thing? We'll move on. What's one thing you have to work on, or have worked on, or continue to work on when it comes to event preparation?
Yeah, it's what you kind of said already, and that's like the small sample size data. Like, I can't tell you how many times in our testing group something is 100-0 or it's broken, it's a buy. And yeah, okay, it's not a buy. We figure it out later. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens. A lot of it's hubris, a lot of it's confidence. And sometimes the people playing the opposing decks are not the right players to be playing that deck. Sometimes they're kind of bad. And that happens at the highest levels. Sometimes people just kind of suck, or they're tired or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of times. I mean, Sasha's the biggest offender. Jesus Christ, the amount of decks he's brought to me that are just broken, never lose, broken. I've been playing on felt tables. Like,
yeah, I've been bidding up a bot for days.
That's a bot. Yeah, so that's definitely the thing that I think we need. Like, it's where we struggle the most. And with the wizard stuff, I think we do have like an inherent bias to really, really wanting it to work. And I do think that we've evaluated it fairly enough. Looking at the past results in the tournaments, but we have a massive bias towards that class.
Yeah. I agree. It's pretty funny, actually. The old oh, dude, you wouldn't believe my win rate. I've been beating up on bots, and then I went on Teleshow and bet up on more bots, and then I've played you guys and bet up on more bots. It's it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's just like the thing that like sometimes happens with Kane was like, oh, how's the Icelander matchup? It's a buy. How's the Fi matchup? It's a buy. How's the Oldham matchup? It's a buy. It's like, okay, like, why are you losing matches in testing? Oh,
like, yeah, exactly. Getting unlucky, man. Let's just get rid of that sample. It's not relevant. Yeah. I think for me, like, continuing to work on is letting go of things. Brendan can attest to this. I sometimes hold very tightly to ideas or things I want to test, and even with probably adequate samples or an understanding of how powerful certain plans are, I'm like, no, I think there's something here, small tweak here, small tweak here. No, I think there's something here, and really I should be letting go of that and moving on, and that's something that I've tried to get better at.
Yeah.
Putting my pits aside.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm just like, fucking, what, a deck loses once, I'm like, garbage can.
It's unplayable.
Next deck.
Even if you don't understand it, right? You're like, no, that's unplayable.
Whack, trash.
All right, last one. What matters more, picking the right deck or having the right plans with heroes you're familiar with?
The second one. We've talked about it a million times. Like, I mean, you just need to be practiced. Like, you could play the best deck in the meta, and if you don't know what you're doing, you're just going to lose. I mean, you could win like a smaller level tournament. You can win armories and stuff like that if you just have a fundamentally powerful deck. No freaking chance if you're showing up at like a Pro Tour or Worlds where other players are also playing. Yeah, I mean, also players are going to be playing that deck. And yeah, I mean, they'll be prepared. Yeah, they'll be prepared.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's like a 90-10 rule, probably. I think I agree, like 90% of the time it's the latter. It's having the right plans with the heroes you're familiar with, because I think you can, we've seen specialists do so well by catering their plans to different fields, changing the deck up, changing the cards up, changing even the game plans up for certain matchups. But sometimes, picking the right deck is just the best thing, even with, you need some serviceable amount of play on these decks, right? Like, and it does depend on the deck, like Icelander versus something like, maybe Briar, for instance. There's a difference in, I guess, getting to 80% versus being proficient in the deck.
I think that this is actually something I want to talk about a little more, because so it's funny because in other card games, I think you can play like tier 1.5 decks and you can like win tournaments like they have more variance, right? And I think Flesh and Blood is a game that the variance is low enough that there are some heroes that are just better than other heroes. And sometimes I think at the highest level, some heroes and some decks are borderline not viable. This doesn't really count like things like Lexi and stuff that are just not picked because, they have like a really bad Oldhim matchup that represents some of the field, but they're actually really good decks if they pair into the right things. This is like, like your Katsu versus your Fi, where it's like, yeah, there's pretty much no reason to be playing Katsu. And it's like, even if that's your pet deck, Fi's probably just kind of better. And like the same thing maybe with like Levia and stuff like that. I think is a bit of a somewhat unique thing to Flesh and Blood where, how the cards are balanced. There are some heroes right now that are just like, they just feel like strictly better almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's consistency is a big part of that. But, I think this is a deep dive for another pod that we have gone into this before, I think, about why selecting certain heroes or decks and familiarity versus just straight power and consistency. Because I think consistency often gets mixed up or confused for power in this game, and sometimes rightly so, and sometimes not so rightly so. So, but yeah, I want to go into just kind of end this main topic of the pod and talking about preparation. Right, I guess we're maybe halfway, whatever it is. Talk about my preparation for Auckland, because there's something that I kind of discovered during preparation for Auckland, which is that and I don't think we've ever really talked about this, Brendan, but I think we have really solidified kind of phases of how traditionally we've tested. I think even when we tested together, Brendan, although we haven't for a while now, we had these phases as well. And it's something that myself and the doctor, Dan Mackay, we do in our testing as well. And it's something that I kind of came to realize that, we have these kind of blocks of testing. So I kind of wanted to go through that, talk about my experience testing for Auckland. Although it has been a bit more limited than maybe I'd like, it's definitely been, I'd say, like pretty thorough, and it started quite early on. So, I mean, Brendan, unless you've got any other things to kind of add on our high-level preparation considerations, I might just dive into that.
The floor is yours.
Feel free to drill me as we go. So, I think the first kind of phase in testing for any event, in my eyes, is like what I'm calling the exploratory phase. And Brendan will be very familiar with this, but it's like this for us started back in January for like ProQuest season. And basically, the exploratory phase often is looking at like testing to try and find something that's broken, new, or exciting. So in this case, it was, I put Outsiders in my notes for some reason, but Dynasty, but we'll be doing this for Outsiders as well. Getting Dynasty, breaking down the set, looking for the cards or the strategies that we think could be interesting, could be viable. So, we've talked about this on the pod when Dynasty dropped in our review, but some of the cards that I was looking at immediately, it's like Looming Doom, like Berserk, like what are these cards? So I spent time with these cards, building decks, trying to make these cards viable. Hanabi Blaster was a card that I was like super interested in, right? Like how this was the exploratory phase. So for us, this looked like Rhina, looked like Viscerai, it looked like Hanabi Dash. That was probably the most successful of those decks we had. It was really powerful. It is really powerful. Livia, definitely spent some time with because of cards like Madcap Charger and some of the new sort of consistent ways to get go again. And then that's kind of what the exploratory phase looks like, is just try and find the most powerful things, try and find the things that are new, that are innovative, that are exciting, and ways that could potentially attack the format in a different way. And Brendan, I know you've always done this with Sasha in your testing. We did this in our testing. It's how we found Chain early. It's how it's how you guys got to Kano. And actually Kano, and for PT1, you guys were testing that from like day one. Like
no, it was actually just Sasha. Just Sasha by himself. And what's funny is like he was actually kind of an outcast in that group because he wouldn't play with anybody. He would just felt table. And it was like borderline a problem. And you saw this happen when you were in the later process of when he was doing the Briar combo thing, which I don't know. Yes. So it was like,
I didn't realize that about Keno, because I unfortunately time zone wise I didn't get to test with you guys for PT1, so I didn't realize that. So he was actually doing the same thing.
Same thing. And he would do that, and he would refuse to play against anybody. And it was like, dude, this is not going to work. And then he would eventually play against me, and the deck would it sucked ass. It was terrible. And it only beat like something very, very like it beat like AB0, and like that's like all it did, literally until like the weekend before. And like the deck was just super bad, and Sasha just felt tabled it the entire time. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, the exploratory phase is a funny one. Because I feel like we actually probably stay in that lane a little bit too long, if anything. I think we're really good at being in that, like we're always looking for the new deck, the best deck, the surprise deck. We always want to catch them. Yeah, absolutely. We always want to catch the meta off guard. We always want to be doing something that's fundamentally unfair. Like we don't want our opponents to be actually playing the game. And yeah, so we probably stay in that period a bit too long. But at the same time, yeah, I think that anybody who's approaching these tournaments, because Flesh and Blood, especially because Flesh and Blood is such a young game, I think that there's almost always opportunity to just crack the meta wide open, which we've seen many times. I think that a lot of Flesh and Blood tournaments have been won by new breakout decks. You got Tarek Patel, Michael Hamilton, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, folks with the Snatch, the yellow line, Belittle, Briar deck, which we did see a little bit of, but obviously, it wasn't the deck that people were on. Yeah, so for us, for Auckland, for this coming calling this weekend, the exploratory phase for me, it's a bit more of a solo experience. I think you don't need to be doing it with testing partners necessarily, because they're going to bang their head against a brick wall when you ask them to play fire while you play every single brew into fire, for instance. But I think this is where I took decks to armories. This is where maybe I wasn't playing consistently every week, but I was like trying to find things, a lot more theory crafting, a little bit less playing. And this was kind of for me, like from basically since Dynasty dropped all the way through to like the end of January, almost to the banner spend announcement. Really, this was the exploratory phase, trying to find things out. I think the next phase is like the refining phase, and this is here where we take decks or strategies that are more established and try and test these to try and understand deeper fundamentals to potentially iterate or adapt on. So for me, in this instance, this happened in January. I moved to the refining phase. I kind of left behind a lot of the exploratory stuff. Rhino got packed away again as per usual. Dash held on though. That's one deck I took from the exploratory phase, was this Hanabi Dash deck, and moved that through. But a lot of the other stuff, the Viscerai, Looming Doom combo deck, the Berserk combo deck, these things, kind of moved to the side, Livia. And then I picked up Lexi for a few weeks and was like, okay, I want to understand fundamentally more about Lexi. It seems to me it's quite well positioned in what this format might look like, what this format kind of looks like right now. So I want to, potentially look at my own list. How would I build this? How can I iterate? How can I adapt on this? Kano is definitely in there. What can Kano maybe look like in this new meta? What does Briar look like? So taking more knowns, I think, and less of like this kind of exploratory thing, and actually just taking these decks rather than just trying to find out, okay, what's the base power level of these decks? It's like, how can you take these into a real meta, so a real life example, and what can these look like, and start to test that way. So playing games, testing different cards, testing slightly different strategies with these heroes that you already know are viable and potentially good.
Yeah, it's actually funny because not only is it broken up into phases, but also like certain players sort of fit those roles a bit better. Like I think in the exploratory phase, I'm almost never ideating decks from zero. I'm always taking these piles of garbage and then testing them against the gauntlet while other people do that. Like.
Whoa.
Yeah, whoa, piles of garbage. But like, no, it's just like that's the player I am. I'm always the player that's tweaking cards, and trying to sort of refine game plans rather than looking for the combos, looking for specific cards to break out, or God forbid, picking up a new class, trying to make that
Brand's
good.
Worst nightmare.
Yeah.
I think so a lot of my testing happens with the Doctor. And that's also, I think, what he does really well as well. Is, I'll throw brews at him and he'll tell me the trash. And then sometimes he'll be like, maybe that's got some viability to it. And we'll play those. Kind of next, I think, so exploratory, if that's finding the best thing, this is refining the best thing, is often what the refining phase is. Then event testing. This is, for me, for Auckland, this has been post-banner spin. This has been the last couple of weeks, a lot more focused sort of testing when, being back from holiday. This is a phase where you start to actually test for the event in question. So no longer are you just sort of, I guess, and even in the last phase, refining phase, it's a bit more sort of theory, like, well, it could look like this. There could be this kind of meta. These are the decks that we kind of roughly want to target. Now when you get to event testing, it's like, okay, we're going to the specific event. Now we're starting to think about the meta for this specific event based on events that have happened previously. And this is where you start to use a lot of information and data, right? You're gathering information from, events like the Calling Indianapolis, Battlehard and Bologna, in our instance. We're looking to find the sentiments of like players in the community and how the meta is likely to develop. So, from week 1 to week 2, indeed to Bologna, Oldham's rise through that, Old Icelanders rise, those are the things that we're interested in. Dash's kind of, slight downfall. Those are the things that we're kind of trying to understand the narratives, to try and get an idea of, okay, what are we testing specifically for the event? This is usually, I guess, moving on from info gathering. It's about the development of the decks rather than finding a deck to play. So we're starting to narrow down the choices and look at game plans and specific matchup percentages. So like, what does this deck into this deck? How do the game plans play out? So Auckland in particular, this is kind of when we narrowed down to Briar, Altum, Dash, Icelander, Kano as like the decks that we think had the best strategies in the format. You know, I'd put Lexi aside again, unfortunately, just based on the starter gathering. It's like I expect a lot of Guardian in New Zealand. So I think Lexi for me kind of moves to the side a little bit, and some of these other decks are more interesting.
Yeah, so we will, what that looks like in practice is we'll put the decks through very rigorous gauntlet testing, pretty much every deck possible, and really hammer home the other tier 1 decks we expect. We will also usually do like a meta prediction. So I'll get in the call, we'll do tier lists, we'll do like a poll to figure out what everybody thinks the most represented decks are, then aggregate that data and, you know, create sort of a visualization from there. It's like, what do we all actually think is going to be the top 3 decks? And, you know, sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes it's not what you individually thought, or you personally thought it would be. And from there, we sort of, you know, refine the sideboard more, make sure we're on the right pick. Like, does this pick suck into the top 3 decks? Maybe it's the wrong thing. And then, just run it into those gauntlet decks.
Yeah, you're rather than trying to find out information about your deck, you're trying to find information out about like the meta and where your deck is positioned. And this is a phase that traditionally I'm a bit poorer at, because I attach myself to the heroes I really have enjoyed during the exploratory and the refining phase and the event testing phase. I want to play those, and maybe I hold on to them too long. Dash, PT1, Kano for Worlds, things like this. Ultimately, obviously played Kano at Worlds, but so for us, what this looked like for Auckland, we started with Kano. We were really interested in looking at Kano again. We felt that, you know, just kind of where Dash is at right now, and Icelander still being around, and even some of the, you know, strategies with like fatigue, with people just playing away Spite naturally, things like this. Kano kind of went to the side. Then we moved to Briar ourselves. It's like, okay, what does Briar look like into the gauntlet? Like Brendan said, we're running this through. And then we pivoted to Dash because we were worried about some of Briar's matchups. And it's like, okay, Dash, I'm really excited about Dash again. A lot of, you know, back to more of a hybrid strategy is the thing that we were kind of looking at again. And then it was like, oh, okay, I just feel like I cannot beat Ultim for the life of me, and I'm worried about that deck being there. I'm pivoting back to Briar now, running that through a bit more gauntlet testing, things that are, you know, answering the questions. Like, one of the quick questions for us was like, how do you beat Ultim? How do you beat Fatigue Ultim? How do you beat both strategies of Ultim? Was like a big question for us. And then moving across to Icelander to try and combat, you know, some of the wider meta expectations as things have started to change as well. So that's kind of, I guess, we're going to move on to the next phase. But I think for me right now, I'm between Briar and Icelander. That's kind of where I'm set at right now. I think those strategies are really strong, just natural strategies. I think they have potentially good spots in the meta game. For me now, it's like trying to decide the last few things about matchups and where I want to potentially pick apart the meta. What are those decks I want to play? And is there any different sort of strategies with those decks that I think are viable, which I do think there's a couple of tweaks and things that can be made for those heroes to potentially attack a potential meta. But I think, like, on the flip side of that, like, Ultim is a deck that's really impressed me during this testing sort of season, as well as actually, like, so has Dromai, which has been really interesting. And I think had I had another week or two and been more of a Dromai player, Dromai is a deck that I could very well land on for Auckland. I think it's actually in a potentially pretty good position this weekend. Bit of a stark contrast to the discussion we had with Tarek last week, though. But I do think Dromai has some legs. And then I guess, Brendan, the last bit of this is the finalizing phase. So this is where this is usually like a few days before an event, 2 or 3 days generally. This is what I'm about to enter into now, which is like we lock in the hero ideally, and now we're refining plans and what we plan to do for the event. So this can look like getting reps in for specific matchups. Maybe someone in the team doesn't quite understand the matchup. We need to get them across that game plan. Where there's still an aspect we don't understand the game plan. We don't quite have the game plan down. We need to start trying to work that out, tweak it a little bit. This is making, like, rather than making hero decisions, we're now making we're not making the background decisions. We're making like gameplay decisions and like plan decisions at this point in this step.
Yeah, and sometimes we're revisiting the exploratory phase.
No longer. I mean, this is a funny thing, right? It's like PT1.
Like, you should talk about PT2 and the freaking Stir the Wildwood deck.
Yeah, I mean, the day before PT2, if you check out the vlog for PT Lille, it's pretty funny. Like, 2 days before the event, so we had 3 days full testing in Lille, and it's like, okay, end of day 1, like feeling really good. Started day 2, like feeling really good. Got this like Stir the Wildwood, this like tall Briar deck. We feel really good about it. End of day 2, absolute shambles. Back to the exploratory phase. It's interesting because in the past, I think these phases have looked very different for myself, for Brendan, for whoever we've been testing with. So, for instance, for like Australian Nationals at the start of 2022, this finalizing phase was actually like a month. Like me and the doctor, Mr. Dan, who were doing all of our testing together for the Nationals season, we had basically decided that we were going to play Viscerai like 3 weeks before, and because we had moved through that refining, that exploratory had happened, we're moving through the refining phase. The format was pretty mature as well, which helped. And then we were just in this like event testing and finalizing phase for like 3 weeks basically. Whereas, like Brendan said, PT Lille, we were jumping and chopping and changing between phases. This finalizing phase happened about, I don't know, an hour before deckless submissions were due.
Yeah, it was.
That's not my ideal though. I don't like
hectic.
that.
It was hectic.
I would say for Worlds as another example from our testing, like Kano, I was in the finalizing phase, I'd say for like the last week and a half, and the kind of event testing phase for like 3 weeks even. Like I moved through the exploratory phase pretty early, was pretty locked on Kano. So it really depends on like, is the meta changing? Is, what is like, who are the people you're testing with? What are the goals you have? Like sometimes you can just say to yourself, okay, like I need a week to 2 weeks for this kind of finalizing phase or this event testing phase, maybe 3 weeks. So I'm locking into a hero or narrowing down to 2 heroes by the like 3 weeks before the event, for instance, and just sticking to it. You can do that.
Yeah, we do set hard deadlines, at least verbally. we do. We're like, well, it's going to be locked by this day, no later. And then, some saboteur in the group just like, well, what about this?
Well, I would say the last few events I've tested and specifically testing with someone like Dan, who obviously I do a lot of testing with. He's a bit more. I'd say normal, a little bit less prone to last minute changing, although he definitely still does it.
Oh my, yeah.
He's cut from the same cloth.
Dan Mackay's got his own funny little quirks too.
Oh, that's true. Some Mackayisms.
Chain.
All right, Brendan, I think that's going to kind of. Sorry.
I was reminiscing about the chain fatigue when we had the strategy, but Dan was just like, nope.
No stack.
No stack.
Why stack? Just play it. All right, Brendan. I think that's going to do it for the main topic of the pod. Talking about calling preparation specifically through the lens of Auckland. I'm super excited for Auckland. As I say, my options are narrowed down. I'm just working out what the plans look like and ready to lock it in the deck for this weekend. Hopefully, a couple more days of testing. I'm flying to Auckland early, so I've got a full day and a half with Dan and our editor Dave to play some last few games and work out what the heck to play. Maybe some card changes, maybe some spicy tech added to these lists. I don't know, Brendan, you got any other last kind of thoughts before we close it out, just on preparations in general?
So, first off, I hope you vlog your dinner in Auckland. So that's going to be very good.
You got a pasta? Yeah. Yes, okay, I will.
Best restaurant in the world.
Just for you.
But so I just want to talk about what I think is like the biggest, probably the biggest failing of all testing since we started playing Flesh and Blood, and I think that's we do treat it a little, or at least I do. I think I end up treating it a little bit serious sometimes, and I think that I kind of treat it as a job, right? And while that's fine for means to an end, I think that the testing process, even when it's unpleasant, even when it feels like work and when it sucks, is very much a part of the overall experience. I think it's important to sort of appreciate that. And it's something that I've reflected on since I, stepped back from playing a bit. It's just like all of that, it's all part of the same experience. And, the testing process isn't like this like hardcore kind of thing you have to get through to get to it. It's very much, very much all runs together.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that no matter where you are on that spectrum of how you want to engage in the testing process, I think these phases are really helpful ways to at least move through it, even if you're doing it in a more casual way. I think just because you want to approach something with a lot of fun and vigor and you want it to be casual doesn't mean you can't have some structure. I think structure is something that often people lack during testing of Flesh and Blood, and it's kind of pretty easy to implement and can help so much. So I really recommend it's just my number one recommendation for people testing is just have some structure to it. It's meaningful testing. That's what will help you get through and prepare for an event.
Yep.
Cool. All right, Brendan, going to close it out. If you want to follow this man right here on Twitter, he's at Brendan APG. I'm at Fian_Dale. Come and find us on Twitter. Again, you can shoot us Commander Cookout questions if you want to through there. I will be at Calling Auckland. Looking forward to seeing some of you there. It's going to be an awesome weekend, I think. I'll be there, I'm sure, around at the venue on Friday too. I think there's a Welcome to Wraith sealed event that James White is playing in. I think you can win like a lore book or something. So that sounds tasty. But anyway, Brendan, until next week, we'll see you in the next one.
Bye, everybody.